Welcome back to the best of Rslash. Today we're taking a look at r/ProRevenge, where OP makes his cheating and bullying friends fail their class. This first story has been posted by Beer Belly Begone. So, I've got an acquaintance, Richard, who has always been of the I know better than you school of thought. What makes it worse is that he literally received his PhD in physics from one of my country's top universities about 6 months ago. So he's not a dummy. The problem is, because he thinks that he's a physics genius, that means he knows better than everyone about everything. Just as an example, my kids are in Montessori schools. This is a decision my wife and I reached together, and we're very happy with it. When he heard, he went on a 30-minute rant/lecture about how we're throwing our money away, and Montessori school is nonsense. When I told him I had read and even professionally translated studies proving the opposite and gave him some real-world example, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, etc., he still would not admit he might not be 100% correct. Not the subject of this revenge, but so you understand the person you're dealing with. Another thing that's important to note is that Richard does not have Asperger's or anything similar. We joke about this all the time, and he's being tested from here until next week. He's just really smart, socially oblivious, and a pain in the ass. Given all of the above, I try to limit my time with him, but unfortunately, that isn't always possible. And last week, we were both at the same group braai for a friend, Jack, who was visiting back home from overseas. I've known Jack since grade school, so we brought our families and made it more than just a long time no see type of thing. At some point later on in the afternoon, my eldest, who we'll call Awesome and less than 10 years old, came to me really sad and said she wanted to go home. When I asked her why, she said that Richard had just spent 15 minutes telling her that she shouldn't eat hot dogs because they're unhealthy, and he explained what went into hot dogs and what they're made out of. Awesome is not a vegetarian, knows that the beef and chicken she eats used to be live animals, and has never professed interest in vegetarianism. At the same time, when a kid is eating a hot dog, they don't care or want to know what's inside. We spoke a bit. I calmed her down and I told her to ignore Richard and go play with her siblings and her friends. Being a kid, she was thankfully easily distracted by something else and moved on. I didn't want to make a fuss with Jack or with Richard, so I just let it be. This turned out to be a mistake. Another 30 minutes later, I heard Awesome scream and began crying. I ran over to her. Richard had come up to her and knocked her hot dog out of her hand, saying she shouldn't eat that garbage. I handed Awesome over to my wife for damage control, and I took Richard aside and told him that A, you don't ever talk to a man's kid without permission, and B, you don't ever teach a man's kid without permission, and C, you sure as shit don't ever touch a man's kid without permission. He doesn't have kids, so I still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. This turned out to be another mistake. Instead of doing the mature thing and moving on, he decided to double down on the hot dog issue. This was the hill he was going to die on. My kids shouldn't be eating hot dogs. Keeping Jack in mind, I disengaged and told him to stay the fuck away from my family. For the rest of the RV, I kept my eye on him and he didn't come near them. Jack enjoyed, we all ate some good meat. End of the story as far as I'm concerned. This turned out to be a mistake again. A few days later, we received a visit from a child protection officer who claimed that we were neglecting our kids, specifically Awesome. She came in and saw that while the house could have been cleaner, well, a house with kids is spotless. Everything was fine. She sat with Awesome for a few minutes and asked her some questions, said everything was fine, and left. First thing I did was call a friend of mine who is a lawyer, just to be on the safe side. He said it looked to him like we were in the clear, but we should keep in touch with him just in case. Next, I began working the grapevine. It turned out that Richard had been offended by how I treated him after the hot dog incident, so he filed a false anonymous report. Being Richard and never thinking he could ever be wrong, he was even talking about it as if people should be proud of him for what he did. I had to make sure though, so the last thing I did before dropping the hammer on him was confronting him personally. I set my phone to record and went to his house. He doubled down, yet again, saying we were torturing Awesome. He's the one who called protective services on us, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. This turned out to be a mistake. I'm not the violent type, but I swear I wanted to break the son of a bitch in half. I told him if he came near myself or anyone in my family again, I'd have a restraining order put out on him, and I'd make sure every single one of our shared acquaintances knew why. I listened to the recording in my car, and his admission that he filed a false report came out as clear as day. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who said he'll get the ball rolling with some friends of his with the public prosecutor to see if we could get Richard in trouble using his admission. Still waiting on that, the wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes. Then, I enacted my actual revenge. See, after he got his PhD, Richard bragged about the new flat he'd been moving into as soon as he sold his current flat. To that end, he renovated most of his current flat, including putting in lots of new and expensive features that required lots of electrical work. He did the same on his new flat. He did most of the electrical work himself, which is a big no-no unless you're licensed. I called an inspector on both of his flats, who asked to see certification on who did the electrical work. Obviously, there was no certification. It wouldn't surprise me if, Richard being Richard, he began arguing with the inspector that this work was good enough and he didn't need to pay someone else to do it for him. I haven't seen or spoken to Richard since, but I've heard that he had to bring in a certified electrician to examine every single change he made in both flats. This meant dismantling everything and having it inspected. Turns out the buyers of his old flat weren't happy with the delay in receiving the keys, and were even unhappier when they learned why there was a delay. They walked away from the deal and are taking him to court. Because his sale fell through, he's now in the hole paying mortgages on 2 flats. I don't know if there's a fine levied against him, but I sure as hell hope so. Lesson of the story, you don't ever f*** with a man's kids. Thank you, OP. As a father myself, I can tell you right now, that would piss me off. This next story has been posted by Mountain Trekker. During my second year in college, I lived with 3 friends in a house that had another 4 guys living on the other side of the house. The 2 sides of the house had a lot of mutual friends as my roommates had known them from high school. So we had a ton of parties during the year and got along pretty good, until a few months before the final exams. Each side of the house had its own electric, water, and cable bills, which we paid separately. I always handled our bills and paid them each month, but our water bill was actually in my roommate's name. I'll call him Bird. So one day, the biggest turd on the other side of the house, Le Douche, who handled their bills, walked into our house when I wasn't there and confronted Little Bird and yelled at him, saying we owed him over $500. Apparently, their water bill each month was about $125 and ours was $40 to $50. Le Douche thought there had to be a mistake in the billing, so we should split the bills down the middle. After I was told about this confrontation, I contacted the water company and asked about the billing. I was told over the phone the bills were specifically split up to each of the house, but a person would come and check out the water meters. The next day, a technician stopped by and looked at the meters to make sure they were operating correctly and that they were billing to the separate sides of the house. He confirmed there wasn't an issue with the meters or billing and basically said they are probably using more water. End of story. I told my roommates about this, but because of my schedule, I didn't see Le Douche for about a week. During that time, he confronted Little Bird a couple more times, who told him about the water company's position, but again, he was yelled at inside our house and was again told that we needed to split the bills with them. Then the weekend comes. My roommate and I head to a house party hosted by some mutual friends. At some point during the party, I was in the front yard when a friend runs up to me and says Le Douche is trying to fight Little Bird. We run to the backyard, and through about 50 people, I can see Le Douche with his friends behind him, in the middle of the circle pushing Bird, yelling that he owes him money, and throwing him onto a beer pong table where he held him down, saying he was going to beat Bird's ass. I nearly lose my mind as I see this and immediately grab Le Douche, say a few choice things, and shove him away. I wanted to do more, but it wasn't worth it. Yet. So Le Douche and I actually had a class together. We weren't friends, never sat together, and since the whole water bill incident, we never even looked at each other in the 500-person lecture. He always sat with one of his roommates, and I sat with one of my best friends, Rose. As the water bill fight somewhat subsided and the final exam got near, Le Douche and his roommates started to act more civil and would even make small talk to Rose and I in the hall about the final being worth 75% of the grade, topics to study, blah 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 blah. They knew Rose and I had A's in the class. It wasn't a very difficult class, but I enjoyed it and actually studied it quite a bit, and I knew I'd probably get an A, and maybe I had let Rose cheat off of me on the first test. I told Rose I had a feeling LeDouche and his roommate were up to something since they were being so nice, and that I expected them to try and cheat off of us. So I came up with a plan if they tried. Now, the format of the test is important. It was a packet of questions with the answers A, B, C, D listed vertically, and then you transfer your answers to a bubble Scantron, which is another sheet of paper that gets put through a machine. Not sure how familiar people are with it. With this format, I told Rose that I would circle an answer. She would look over and circle the same answer with a big circle, ensuring that anyone looking could see. We would do this for the entire 100-question final before marking our answers on the Scantron. The key to this revenge plan was that the actual answer was always going to be the answer directly below the circled answer. So if we circle A, the answer we put on the Scantron is B. If we circle answer D, the answer we put is A. For a few days, I kind of thought I was being weird and crazy to come up with this plan because there was no way this guy actually thought he would cheat, and I was blinded by anger. Either way, when the day of the final exam came, we got to the room early and I sat on the front right seat of the row with Rose to my left. Guess who strolls in and decides to sit next to us for the first time all year after he threatened to beat up my best friend, and a month before, oh yeah, LeDouche. Dude had no shame and snuggled right in the seat next to Rose with his roommate next to him. Rose and I could barely believe it and had to use some serious composure before the test started. The two of us operated like a well-oiled machine. We circled our answers large, and at the end we went back through and marked the correct answers onto the Scantron. During the test, we could both see LeDouche and his roommates leaning and copying our circled answers. Unreal. Fast forward to the summer break, and LeDouche's roommate came over to our side of the house. When he saw Rose was there with me, he opened a beer and chatted for a bit, and he finally got to what we were waiting for. So how did you guys do on the test? I remember looking at Rose and saying something like, I don't remember exactly, but I ended up with an A in the class. And she chimes in saying, yeah, that sounds about right. I got a 92 on the test. The look on his face told us everything we needed to know, and he mumbled out, really? LeDouche and I both failed, and I have to take the class again. The only way that this could have been a better revenge is also after he said that he failed the test, he just beat the living shit out of him. That would have made the story extra funny, but also horribly illegal, so thank you for not doing that. Thank you for listening to the best of Rslash. If you like this content, please make sure that you leave a thumbs up, as that is the best way to help our channel grow. Also, if you didn't know already, we release content like this every single day, 7 days a week, so if you want to hear more, please subscribe.